Hello, my beloved friends who happen to be watching on either our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, wherever you happen to be watching from. I want to remind you that you are infinitely precious and unconditionally loved for the gift you already are, right now, in this very moment, whenever this moment is. If you're watching live or you're watching later on, just remember that you are infinitely precious and unconditionally loved. Today, I thought I would talk a little bit about expectations. And part of the reason why I wanted to talk about expectations is because there almost wasn't a weekly message today because of expectations. Mine, to be specific. I I kind of have these parameters in my mind sometimes, expectations about the way I'm going to be prepared and where I'm physically going to be when I do uh, this weekly message, and expectations about what the space behind me will look like. There was a whole period of time when the weekly messages didn't happen because I had this plan to build a backdrop so there would be this perfect, as if there is such a thing, backdrop behind me. And when I first brought up the producer, I'm trying a new way of a Boxcast has this wonderful way you can do it with your browser. So I'm trying a new way today in my office, in my space. And the first time I brought this up and saw a preview of the space I was in, I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to see where I sit in the morning. And the stuff that's piled on the table next to me, and my cross on the wall, my crucifix, and my, oh my goodness, my backpack's in there. And so I looked at it and I closed down the computer and I went and made a cup of coffee. And while I was making a cup of coffee, I already had a plan to talk about expectations. And I realized having expectations sometimes thwarts us getting the things done or being in the moment the way we might want to be. Because we're so busy getting focused on our expectation for how it's going to be. I've helped couples plan their weddings for years, and there are certain expectations. Um, Generally, they don't plan for years, but over many years of my ministry, I've been doing weddings, I guess, for probably over 35 years. And there are always expectations for the day. What's going to happen that day? And so part of what I do, or at least try to do in premarital counseling, is help people let go of the expectations. Because in the end, if you build up to some level of expectation about just about anything in your life, then it almost always, the higher your expectation, the more likely it is to disappoint you. Now, I'm not saying you should never, ever, ever have expectations, but I do think that you have to be careful about the expectations that you set. And not just the expectations you set, but that are set for you. Whether those expectations you set for yourself, there's a layer of those, and then there's a layer of other people's expectations for you. And perhaps if you're in a particular profession or a work, there's another layer that goes over that. If you have a job and you have a job description, there's a layer of expectations that go with that. And there's this whole list of expectations that we place on almost everything we involve ourselves in this world. And it's those expectations that can take the joy out of being alive sometimes. Because almost always what we expect is not what happens. In the little ways, we expect to make breakfast a certain way every day. Maybe you don't. Maybe you rush about and all the things that happen in the kitchen is just what happens. But for me, there's certain expectations about what order I'll go in, put the hot water on so that I can make the pour over coffee, and then put water in the pots on the stove so I can begin to boil them to make oatmeal. And then when I start the pour over, and then when I put it in the thermos, and then when I start a second pot for pour over, all those kinds of things. And when something interferes, like on the days I have to unload the dishwasher first thing in the morning, or I drop something in the process, or I forget to press the button that starts the water boiling in our um, in our kettle. Any of those things can throw things off. And immediately I get into a mood. And it's not always a good mood. And the mood is set because I had an expectation that everything was going to go a certain way. And the truth is, everything almost never goes the certain way that you had in your mind. So, if we want to really experience life as it comes, certainly there are certain minimal expectations we ought to have for our lives. Some minimal expectations, perhaps, that our employers or that we can have for ourselves, that our family members or friends can expect from us. But beyond that, we have to be careful about those expectations and what we do. So, one of the challenges I wanted to lay before you this week, or encourage you to take up whenever you see this, is to look at the layered expectations that are in your life. You might begin by saying, what are my own expectations in my life? What do I really expect? Say, imagine that you expect to eat chocolate for every meal every day. That's an expectation, and oftentimes that just is not going to happen. And if it does, I'm not sure it's a healthy choice, but that's a side issue altogether. Then the expectations that other people that eat with you might have. They don't want chocolate for every meal. Heck, they might not want chocolate for any meal. And so now there's another set of expectations. And then perhaps your peers or the profession you find yourself in, the work that you do, even the expectations you might have for if you are a stay-at-home dad or mom, the expectations you have for how you're going to keep the house and what kinds of things you're going to be involved in. All these expectations start to pile up. And then suddenly it's like an obstacle course every single day to try to avoid not meeting the expectations. Sometimes you miss something completely altogether because you're so caught up in those ideas of the way this day is supposed to be that you don't get to really experience the day. So, for me, I want to invite you to look at those expectations, to ponder those expectations, maybe even to write them down and divide them into my own expectations, my family's expectations, the expectations that seem to be floating in my brain that I'm not even sure where they came from. Perhaps a Sunday school teacher or a school teacher or parents or other things that are in there, and you just suddenly find that you have an expectation. You don't know where it came from. The unknown expectations, and then all those, and look at the layers. Look at the obstacle course that you're running every day, and then figure out, are there some of those expectations that maybe are just unrealistic and you just need to let them go? And you probably won't just let them go once. You'll probably have to let them go time and again and again, like I do when things don't go my way at breakfast time, or when I'm using a different camera that's showing my sitting space that's maybe not as neat as I would like it to be for the camera. It's perfectly fine for me as a person, so why do I care what the camera thinks? Why do I care? Because I have weird expectations. I have different expectations. Maybe they're not weird, they're just expectations. So pay attention to that in your life, and remember always, whatever your expectations, whether you have a million of them or almost none, you are infinitely precious and unconditionally loved for the gift you already are. Don't forget that. And thanks for coming today.